Back to another episode of Bulletproof Selling. My name is Sean Rhodes. I'm the Chief Sales Sergeant here at Bulletproof Selling and author of the book Bulletproof Selling, a guide for systemizing sales on the battlefield of business. Now, here at this brand, at this movement that we're creating, we believe that hope is not a sales strategy. And so we are here every single week, sometimes multiple times a week, to increase the performance of salespeople and of their pipelines. Now, we get to interview some of the top speakers, authors, consultants, trainers in the world of sales. And we also get to interview those who are out on the front lines of sales, growing pipelines, managing salespeople, and of course, standing up new businesses of their own. And our commitment is that out of every single one of these episodes, we're going to create a sales system with our guest to help you, whether you're growing a team of one or a team of 1,000, get better results across your sales systems as well. And that's why it's my pleasure this week to welcome Joseph Fung onto the show. Joseph, welcome back, sir.
Thanks for having me, Sean. This is going to be fun.
Absolutely, sir. So for those of you that don't know who Joseph is, Joseph, give us a little bit about your background, because your kind of experience in the world, you're a fairly young guy like me, but you've accomplished so much in the world of sales and in the world of growing businesses. So for those that don't know who you are, let's hear it, man.
For sure. So the LinkedIn version, repeat entrepreneur, all in the B2B SaaS space. I've grown teams that were selling teams from 2 people of us in the garage to hundreds of sales reps around the world. And now we're taking all that expertise and we run a career success program. We help people get out of other industries into technology through the sales organization. So we get to see teams who do it best every single day, and it's such a blast.
And tell me a little bit about the kind of experience that you've had with those sales teams right now. So I understand that you're not quite a recruiting agency, but you are taking people, getting them trained for the world of sales. Talk to us a little bit about that business model. For those of us that are just, VPs of sales or CROs, what you do probably sounds very interesting to them. Like they might want to hook up with you, man, and get some of your folks.
Yeah. So if folks want to reach out to me, happy to, because we deliver a training program where we sell to individuals who want to achieve more in their career. And it's a very detailed, robust program. The key nugget is that they pay for tuition once they land a role at a tech company in a sales role. And we're not a recruiting agency. We're not charging companies fees. So if anyone wants to reach out, get access to great talent and help us make some introductions, always happy to do that. The part that's so neat is because our success is linked to theirs, we care deeply about what works. And we see our grads on average achieving 50% more quota than the people brought on directly. So we've seen a lot about what works and what doesn't, and always happy to share.
And then that's my next question. Do you tend to deal with people who are coming into the world of sales for the first time in their careers, or folks that worked in sales in some aspect, inside or outside sales, are trying to up level, so they're getting your training, and then of course the placement that might come afterwards?
Yeah. So a bit of both, but the lion's share are folks who are brand new to the world. I mean, about 20% of our members have been selling something. And I mean, it's the gamut. I mean, selling Harley Davidsons, selling roofing and shingles, selling travel. That's about 20%. The rest are straight off of other customer service roles. I mean, bartenders, flight attendants, hotel desk managers. So it's a whole range. And the reality is sometimes people come out of our program and land entry-level roles, and sometimes they're landing more senior or management roles, and it all depends on where they started from. So a lot of career up-leveling and a lot of acceleration.
And then what does the placement process look like for you? Is that dependent on where someone wants to be placed, how well they do in your course, kind of the industry they want to go into? Talk to us a little bit about somebody graduates. How do you help them get employed?
So a large part of it, first off, is we're not a placement agency. And the reason why that's important is placement agencies will take you and put you in a role. You don't really have a choice. I mean, I'm sure and everyone listening in, what you're selling matters a lot. And so again, we're not pushing people into specific roles. What we do is we automate a lot of the job search, and we have some very, very smart matching technology. So what that means is we have companies reach out to us all the time, but we also crawl all the job boards, Google Job Search, Indeed, venture capitalists' websites, individual company sites. We have over 600,000 sales jobs in our database. And we match those industries and customers to the professionals. So a cliched example, if you see any of our ads, you might see Matt on them because his story is a great one. He spent 8 years as a bartender and a bar manager, and we paired him and introduced him to a company where he's selling scheduling software to bar managers and restaurant managers. He knows the customer. So we do a lot of very smart matching. It's kind of like giving each professional this sniper rifle for what role they should chase. And just like in sales and the job search, precision matters.
I love the fact that you bring in the sniper analogy. So something that I was actually able to do studying high-performing teams all over the world was embed with Marine Corps snipers. And we found something very interesting about them that really aligns well to the world of sales, in that the very best among them were not interested in how many rounds they could put down range. It was getting that one opportunity with the right person at the right time, at the right part of the sales cycle where they knew they could make the biggest impact. And so for you, kind of coming at this world, because you have a background in venture capital, now you're running this, really brilliant business model, by the way. I'm actually very excited about getting you in here and talking about what you see salespeople do, because you're like a lot of CROs in that they're bringing people on that may not have a lot of experience in sales. Maybe they do, like you said, 20% do. You have to educate these folks on what the world is actually like if you want to be more successful in this field. So where do you see the people coming through your business model, through your courses, through your training? Where are they relying on hope a little more than they should, either in the way they think the sales profession might look like that it really isn't, or in the way they think that, all I got to do is pick up the phone and like make some calls and people are going to start buying stuff? Where does hope really come into what you see people coming into your business model with?
So the first experience, most of the people who come into our program were either beginning or the tail end of a job search. So they're out there saying, I want to be in tech. I want to level up my sales role, or I'm underappreciated. And honestly, a lot of their job search feels like hope-based job search. And I'm sure you've seen this. Folks say, hey, I want to be in tech. What do I know? Well, I know LinkedIn, or we use Slack, or I really like gaming, so Xbox is a thing. I'll send my resume there. And that hope-based approach just doesn't yield results. And so we hear people say, I sent my resume to 100 places and I never got a call back. And it's because there's no precision. The second thing is in the actual selling motion. And ironically, it's the same thing with the job search. People will send out an email, they'll put out a voicemail, they'll send out a call and hope someone reacts. And it doesn't work that way. You got to put in the effort to plan, the effort to follow up, and the effort to make sure you've covered all your bases. And we help people in their sales process level up, but also in their job search. And the funny part, and folks listening in might really appreciate this, on the sales recruiting, it's the same thing. Folks send a job posting up and they hope they get a magical unicorn of a candidate, and that just doesn't work.
And so how does your service help folks remove that hope from either their job search strategy, whether they're, because it sounds like you're not just covering salespeople, if I'm right here, a wide variety of placements, people that you're training for a variety of roles, or is it just sales?
So we focus on revenue roles. So sales is the bread and butter. So you're talking about junior sales development, AEs, but we see a lot of our grads go into customer success, account management, sales engineering, sales leadership, but it's all in that revenue management side of the business.
And so where do you, without giving away your secret sauce, because if folks want to get in touch with you, we're definitely going to be, posting your info in the show notes and making sure people can do that. But without giving away that secret sauce, how do you help them remove hope from the way that they go about getting ready for up-leveling in a sales role, and then ultimately getting that position with a company that really excites them and aligns with where they want to go?
So none of this is super secret sauce. I wish more recruiters, sales leaders did this. So share it with everyone. A large part of it is, and I say this with love in my heart, I've been a people manager, I've been a leader, I've been a CEO. So many leaders just do what's been done before without really thinking through it. And so recruiting says, hey, give me a job description. What do you need? Or we need requirements. What tools do they use? And so you have a job description that says, well, you got to know how to use Salesforce or HubSpot, and you got to know how to use Gong, and you got to know how to use LinkedIn. And the reality is, great sales reps, they don't come from just knowing these requirements. They come from knowing the customer, from having the grit, from having the tenacity to focus in. And very few organizations set themselves up to succeed on that. And likewise, individuals don't realize that that's actually what matters. So they go through and they start looking at a list of software and saying, oh, I got to know all these tools. And the dirty secret to it is that if a sales team on average has 20 different tools, and they do, and if the average tool is replaced every 4 years, and they are, that means every year you've got to replace 20% of your knowledge anyway. So stop trying to hire people on outdated information. The moment you post the job, it's out of date. Instead, focus on those competencies, the grit, the appreciation of the customers, that idea of being really, really focused and targeted, and don't just post a job, don't just react to the job. You got to dig in underneath to figure out what those needs are. It's the same thing. When a prospect reaches out to you, don't just take the form and then sell. You got to dig in to find the need and the pain point. Same thing happens in the job search.
This is really interesting because you're coming at it from the angle of, instead of learning the tech, which is important, right? Without the tech, you are just kind of hoping the phone rings. That's important.
Yep.
But you're coming at it from the perspective of, it's more important that you understand the customer, because the tech can always be learned. But learning the customer is the harder piece of this puzzle. It's the one that requires more years in the industry, understanding their challenges. So how do you ensure that the salespeople that are coming through your program really understand? Because a lot of us are coming from a lot of different industries. And there might be a common thread, we're all humans, right? But I might be dealing with an industry where I dealt with distribution. Maybe I was working for a manufacturer for a while, and then I got into the world of tech and SAS. So how do you help people identify what their real expertise is in the customer role, so that you can get them set up with the tech and get them really up-leveled there?
Yeah, so it's interesting. You're right. Folks need to know how to use their tools. Totally. So I don't mean to imply that we don't spend the time on that, because we do. It's like, hey, learn how to use Zoom, learn how to use LinkedIn. You have to, but that's not what you're going to sell yourself on. Like, the reality is there's hundreds and hundreds of reps that are interested in every role who know how to use Zoom, know how to use LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. Where you can differentiate yourself is understanding the customer of that business. And so where we spend a lot of time is we help people actually unpack what their experience is. I mean, like the bartender who comes in, we start off like, hey, what experience do they have? And when people are beaten down, they go, I don't have any experience.
Right.
Yeah. I don't have any applies.
I'm 35 years old. I've had 8 jobs, but no experience,
Totally. Exactly. Yeah. And the reality is, one good example, we had a gentleman who came to us and he worked in logistics. I mean, driving truck and helping other truck drivers. And he's saying, I want to be in tech. And he's saying, I've got no relevant experience. The reality is, everything he needed to do to know about scheduling, logistics, that pipeline, helped him understand that side of the business really well. And now he's working at a company that sells, this is so different for the trucking. They're selling AI-powered business intelligence to water consultants. So they're companies that say, yeah, we're going to help your city, your state conserve water better with all of this amazing business intelligence. But the actual same underlying issue of systems and logistics and what those buyers consider is exactly what he has in spades. And so first month, he does 450% of quota. They double his quota. He then does 350% of quota. I mean, you can't say just because you haven't sold software before you have no experience. It's really about taking the experience you have and then thinking, who has buyers that have those same problems? Because they exist. The tech space is so big and it's exploding. They always exist there. And so, yes, we have some tech that makes that easier, but it's really more about that mindset shift. Like, stop just hoping, and then actually see the value that you have and then aim for those businesses.
And obviously we talk a lot about systems in this area. So if I've got a really good understanding of my expertise and my knowledge, and I know my customer, I still have to be able to do something predictably day in and day out to drive that 300% quota. Unless I'm just throwing darts at the wall and happen to hit the bullseye every time, it requires a little more back-end thought. What's the first system that you find most useful for these folks coming out of any industry, but then now entering the world of tech sales?
The really interesting thing is, for folks that are going through that transition, there's often 2 things they don't know. The first one is that almost every company has a sales methodology that they're following. And I'm not coming to this saying methodology A is better than B and you better do this. The reality is most tech companies struggle not because of the methodology they've chosen, but because people aren't adhering to it.
So it's adherence. I like that. Yeah.
Totally. And it's so funny. We see our grads and the numbers are ridiculous at how much they outcompete their peers. And when we dig into it, we interview them, we interview the companies. The answer is always, they're doing what we said we should do. They're sending the emails, they're doing the follow-up, they're doing the qualifying. So the idea of there is a system and work it, we hear the same thing from athletes. You join a team, you figure out the team system, and then you work it, and that's how you succeed. So that's the first really big thing. The second thing is that idea of trying to automate yourself. And this is the part that I think a lot of companies fall down on. They think, hey, my team's sending a lot of emails, they're doing a lot of calls, I'm going to buy this technology and give it to them, and that's going to magically make things work. So many sales reps resist the adoption of the technology They worry about the risk to their job. They
Yeah.
worry about being forced to change, all that. And when you can help someone think that, you know what, your job is to touch as many of the right people at the right time, spend and focus your time, choose the tools that automate your behavior, it's a hugely empowering thing. And then you see them go out and they try their own Chrome extensions, their own apps, their own plugins. They bring tech into the company and they see their performance outstrip everybody else. So it's really that mind shift. It's like, don't think about automation as a risk to your job. Think about it as you're making yourself a cyborg. You get to pick the tech and the tools that you want.
Yep, and that's exactly what I do with my CRM and what we advocate companies do when I'm going in and training them, right? It's setting up that CRM to be the brain. Let it automate your tasks. You're the human face because you have to interact with other humans, but let a system drive your tasks. So I know every day I got to make these 18 phone calls and send these 16 emails and write these 3 letters, and and I'm the one that has to do it, or I can outsource that. But hey, that system drives my brain for me, makes me a cyborg. So I absolutely love the idea of automating ourselves as salespeople. Now, if I'm a salesperson and I'm hearing this and I'm thinking to myself, wow, that's a really great idea, but how do I determine what I should be automating first? What do you recommend salespeople do in that way?
So I'm going to give you 2 answers to it. The first one, in terms of things like technology, specifically, if you have money in your pocket, you want to go out shopping, simple things like sales engagement tools. So using a sales loft, an outreach, the Salesforce high velocity sales, or HubSpot sequences. That's just going to help you do your calls or emails easily 2, 3, 5 times faster, depending on your flow. So it's kind of like brass tacks. Things like video, pre-recording some of your videos that you send out, totally, that's easy. If people want to go shopping, do that. The second thing we talk about, and I'm sure you saw this, when you're in the field and you're talking to people, is just that idea of documenting and writing down your checklists so you can stop thinking about them. When we bring people into our program, one of the things we talk about is when you're on a Zoom call, the way you use your technology is how your buyer is going to judge you. So here's a checklist of things to know. Is your camera aimed here, or is it like way up here?
Right.
Things like that. Is your desktop cleaned up? And it's this 30-list checklist. And it's funny because we pull it up on the screen, and everybody, you see them, they kind of lean in, and you see them trying to memorize it. And it's funny because everyone assumes to be a professional, you need to memorize these all. But it's furthest from the truth. Get it out of your brain. Pilots use checklists, surgeons use checklists, astronauts use checklists. If they can, who are we to say you're not a professional by using a checklist? So it's like, get off that, write it down into a checklist. And a side effect is the moment you have a checklist, now you've got the items that you're doing. Like, oh, these things can be automated. And that just gives you that shopping list of automation.
Interesting. So let's dive into this, because this is something that I'm a firm believer in as well. In my company, we run a process every week where I ask everyone on my team, and we do this with other organizations as well, it's brilliant, ask them to bring a challenge that they've encountered, a problem, an objection they couldn't overcome, they couldn't log into the CRM that week because it was down, whatever it is. And we work out ways to either build a new checklist item in an existing checklist, make sure you check your password or whatever it looks like. Or, hey, we realize we don't have a checklist in this area. This is an entirely new field, but we need one. So we stand up a very basic checklist. But that way, like you said, we get it out of our head. Salespeople can stop hoping they remember what to do. You look at even a common sales conversation, it might have 24 steps. And you got to discover these 8 things about the buyer. Those are your discovery questions. You got to make sure you're talking about follow-on opportunity, getting referrals, all these things. Try to get that done from memory. If an astronaut can't do it, you as a salesperson, smart as you are, probably ain't going to happen. So let's talk about building checklists, because this is something I feel like could really benefit any salesperson almost immediately. When we talk about building systems at Bulletproof Selling, we use this acronym TRIM, because we talk about trimming hope away from our sales. And the first T in this acronym, TRIM, right, is the trigger. How do I start? What is the triggering effect for me to begin building a checklist? Is it just like the next thing I happen to do once I get in the office? Is it, where do you recommend salespeople really start in building their own checklists?
So that same thing, that trigger, I love that word. It's way better. For us, we think about it as, it's way too long, the need event. What's the thing?
Fair,
but trigger, I'm going to be using that. We generally see 2 big need events. The first one is something went wrong. It's like, you hopped into that call, totally, you realize, crap, I forgot to follow up with that customer, or the customer closes the deal and someone in your service group goes, you sold what? Something went wrong. Well, that's a trigger that maybe your checklists are out of date.
Right.
The second thing, and this is the interesting one, and the one I think is actually more powerful, because it's way better to prevent a problem from going wrong. But as a person, when you're going through it as a professional, when you ever find that feeling where you're like, I hope this doesn't go sideways, that anxiety, that little bit of dread, you're going to the pitch and like the customer's a little bit late, and you're like, I hope this was just like a tech issue. Because the moment you feel that anxiety, you're like, oh, there's something here that we could have had a check and balance, a checklist ahead of time to feel more confident. Somebody else might have validated, like, oh, maybe I should have texted them 5 minutes before to make sure they're not going to be late. I'll add that to my list. So we look at it, something went wrong, or you've got that feeling of dread and anxiety that something might go wrong. Those are two big triggers.
And you mentioned, like you're in a meeting and you say, hey, I closed that deal. And someone's like, how'd you do that?
Yeah.
So it's not only just what goes wrong. I love it. That's where you really got to focus. But also if something goes right. And this is something that so few companies even take the time to do after a great quarter. Like you're a fellow who made 300% of number. If he's working for a smart leader, that leader sat him down and said, walk me through how you did this so I can replicate it with everybody else that's on the team or that I want to hire to be on the team.
Yeah.
And that way they can get maybe not a 300%, but if they get to 150, that's a great year. I'd love for my salespeople to get to 150% of quota. So if the trigger is any type of event that's going wrong or something that goes really well, somebody asked the question, how'd you do that? Great triggering event. Now, the second piece of this is to make it repeatable. Now, obviously, the checklist for whatever event is outside of our heads. So that's the repeatable thing. But I want a repeatable way to build a checklist, so that I don't have to think about, wow, am I writing down 10 steps, 15 steps, 20 steps? Do they need to be in order, out of order? When is the thing brought into use? Does it need to live on my computer, on a sheet of paper? How do I make building a checklist repeatable as a salesperson?
So this is really funny because this problem has been solved by so many people. It's just not done in sales organizations very much.
Yes.
So you look at engineering, you look at product development, you look at operations. I mean, and this isn't like a small thing. There are reasons why there are things like ISO 27001, why agile development is a thing, why product management is a school of practice. Mm-hmm. In any company, there's the people, and we tend to think about our work in that sense. But in each of those other groups, product development, your assembly line, your operations, the product, that assembly line, the process is this kind of external entity. And the organization has a way to regularly look at and say, how do we make this thing better? So in software development teams, they're going to run meetings every sprint. That's usually like every 2 weeks or so, called a retrospective and a plan. Great. ISO 27001. Typically, they'll run quarterly and annual reviews where they say, let's look at the process, what worked, what didn't, let's change the process. Great. Sales organizations have regular meetings. You've got QBRs, you've got SKOs, you've got your weekly reviews. Carve time out to talk about the process. Not just about how Sean, Joseph, Samantha, Jimmy did on that deal or in their flow, but what about the process is working and isn't? And so few teams actually carve out time for that. Because then it's not about you, it's not about me, it's about this amorphous process, and you can have a much more honest conversation. And you can keep it improving every single time.
Mm-hmm. And so if I'm doing that, I'm talking about the process. What is the step for me then to turn this process into something that lives outside of my head into a checklist? Because you could get really technical with your checklists. I have task sets that run in my CRM that are very technical with dependent steps and all this other fun stuff. And then I have checklists that are written on a sheet of paper. Like it goes both ways. If you're advising a salesperson or you're teaching them how to start building these type of checklists for themselves, what's your first piece of advice? Is it find the way that works for you? Is it do something online or digitally or manually?
We have got tools that we recommend, of course, and that's mostly because the largest portion of our grads are going into B2B software companies. So there's a lot of tools that'll work really well. Most of them are using HubSpot and Salesforce. They're using an enablement program like Kiite or others. When you look across industry, there's going to be a lot of other tools. The big thing that's been challenging, let me dial back. If I speak to a CEO, a VP of sales, I'm like, hey, these are the technical tools you're going to need. Everybody goes, yeah, I'm going to do that. People buy tech really quickly. The challenge is that if you're a one-person team a really small team, you can't just hope someone does this for you. You've got to do it yourself. And if you're a leader, you can't just hope the team does it. You actually have to invest. This is something I think a lot of sales leaders don't get, but they actually have to invest in personnel, in team members, in people whose job is to make the process better. Like, to draw that analogy,
yeah, absolutely.
Engineering teams have DevOps and product managers. Operations teams have project managers and facilitators. Sales teams, the closest that they'll have will be like a sales enablement professional or a RevOps team. And usually the ratio is way too high. Like one RevOps, one enablement person to 40 or 50 people. The best teams that we see, they'll have like a 1-to-20 ratio. It's just that one role magnifies. Like, it's not just an addition. They're not adding one person. They're multiplying everyone else's efficacy. And so if you're a leader or you're a CEO, you got to invest in that part of your organization.
And that leads us into the next piece of this acronym. So we've got the trigger, we've got making it repeatable. You've given us a couple of ways to develop a checklist. And again, it could be digitally, could be manually, sheet of paper. Sometimes that works too. The next piece of this is the I in trim, which is making this thing improvable. I've met many great DevOps managers, sales enablement managers, sales coaches. There's a lot of different names they go through inside of a company. But what do I need to be doing with my team and my checklists to make sure that these checklists do keep up with the changing market, keep up with technology? The checklists we were using in 2019 were almost useless in 2020 because we had to go virtual, right? So it wasn't about, make sure you pack your product sample in your briefcase. You ain't going anywhere, You don't have a product sample. You might have to mail it to the person you're going to have the Zoom call with. So how do I make sure that I'm improving my checklists?
It's a really hard thing. I mean, you take a look at that idea of a regular meeting where you're revisiting your processes, your checklists. That's actually going to cover a lot of it. The reality, though, is when you think about a test, you can get a false positive or a false negative. The only way to validate this is to make sure you're not just getting false positives. Like, you could have a checklist and your processes are working and nothing's falling through the crack. And you can say, great, the checklist is working. That might not be. It might be that people are ignoring the checklist or are doing things that aren't documented. And those are false positives. So the only thing you can do to find a false positive is to take someone who doesn't know the process at all and then get them to run the process. So
interesting.
You take a leader who's not in frontline sales and you get them to carry quota for a month or two. You get someone in your enablement team, get them to carry a quota for a quarter. You get somebody who's in one product sales area, you get them to do the other. And that's scary. That's terrifying. You're like, whoa, I'm going to take them off one quota area and put them in the other one. But it is best to do that at a time when you're not at the end of the quarter. You're not going through these really aggressive targets. You take a breath and you're like, okay, let's do this. It's like, product teams and IT teams do disaster recovery testing to make sure everything works. By taking somebody that doesn't know the process, giving them your documentation, your checklist, say do the process, you're doing disaster recovery and you're validating that you can have a process that works, and they're going to find a ton of gaps every time. It's never going to be perfect.
They'll send up all the flags.
All of these, and that'll make sure that you're improving it.
Yep, that you're building that checklist out, adding items where maybe there weren't items before, or even simply clarifying language. You and your salespeople may know what CRM means, but believe it or not, I run into a lot of folks. They're like, CRM, I have no idea. I've heard the term, but I couldn't tell you what it stands for or where to find it or what version my company uses. So brilliant stuff there. Now, we've gone through the trigger, making it repeatable. It's got a great way to improve now. Give it to somebody that doesn't usually run the system and have them try to break it. That's a brilliant thing. We call that red teaming in the military. When we would create a plan, for instance, to get ready to go into a city in Iraq, let's say we're going to run a patrol into Fallujah, we'd map this really extensive plan out, and then we would have someone come in from outside the planning team, and we would say, pretend that you're the enemy and you have this plan in advance. How would you destroy us? And they'd say, well, we would put a roadblock here, or we'd create an ambush point here. And that way it let us know, wow, we need to consider these things. They're not all going to happen, but if we don't take the time to test them, then things could really end poorly. And thankfully, life is not on the line for any of the salespeople that you're training, hopefully, but our sales are. So it's important that we do these things. So we've got most of the acronym down, but now the final piece, which is I'm interested to get your perspective on this, because a checklist could apply to any area of the sales cycle, client-facing or administratively. All the things the salesperson has to do just to make sure their boss knows what's going on and CRM notes and everything else. The final M in trim is measure. How do you recommend that we start to measure the effectiveness of our checklists? Is it just converted business, that lagging indicator? Are we looking at things a little earlier on, the leading indicators? How do you recommend that we start to measure the success of these things?
Yeah, I love the fact that you brought up that idea of lagging and leading because you got to measure both. You got to measure the behaviors and the outcomes. And I think the part that a lot of leaders miss is that you have to do that for every role. We often see this. We see this, hey, if you're in a sales development, a lead gen team, they'll measure the behaviors. How many calls are you doing? How many emails are you doing? And how many meetings are you booked? So you've got the output. For account executives, you'll often see that as well. Hey, how much do you have in your pipeline? How many prospects are you dealing with? How much are you closing and working? What ends up happening, though, is that they miss it for leadership. They miss it for operations. They miss both. So the number of sales leaders I know who are only measured on their attainment, they're not being measured on things like process adherence, recruiting activities, coaching calls, or their number of sales enablement leaders and professionals who are only measured on the inputs. How many butts in seats did you have for your training sessions? How many workshops did you deliver? How many white papers or one-pagers did you ship? And no one measures the output in terms of process throughput or lift. Every role you need to measure both. And the big thing everyone misses is that that's every revenue role. It's not just the SDRs, the AEs. It's management, it's enablement across the board.
And that way you can hopefully notice things. If you notice your leading indicators dropping off, they're undoubtedly going to affect your lagging indicators. You know that miles ahead of hitting that brick wall at the end of the quarter where we don't have any more time to get any more number in, but hey, we're here and we're under. I'd rather know about that. And that's why I really encourage teams to track those things ahead of time, in addition to the lagging indicators. So what we've done, Joseph, we've got the entire sales system built out for how any salesperson could put together a checklist for any area of their business cycle. This is incredibly valuable stuff. So I want to thank you for helping me build it, because that's what we do here at Bulletproof Selling. So for the folks that are, they've listening to you, they say, I really want more of what Joseph's got to offer. I'm thinking of maybe changing roles, joining a sales force in one of these tech companies, or hey, maybe I'm a salesperson and I just want to level up. I just want to find out what's going on over there. It could maybe give me some insight to make me a little better at what I do. How do people get a hold of you, get into your world, and find out a little bit about the company that you're running?
Totally. So you can hit up our website, Uvaro, Uvaro.com. There's a big red apply button, a contact page, all that. But I'm always happy to have those conversations. I'm on most social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all the same handle, Joseph Fung. Reach out to me. I'm happy to chat.
Awesome, sir. Well, thank you so much for helping us build that system, for giving back to the sales world. And for all of you listeners and viewers out there, make sure you're following us here at Bulletproof Selling on Facebook, LinkedIn, and of course, YouTube, where we house all of these live streams. You thought this was a great conversation. You'd like access to about 40 more of them for free. They're all right there on YouTube. Of course, our podcast, in case you're listening that way, it's available on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and as of this morning, Amazon as well. So for more sales systems to help you replace hope with certainty in your pipeline, check out bulletproof-selling.com. Sean Rhodes here with Mr. Joseph Fung. It's been a pleasure serving the sales community alongside you, sir. Let's get out there and make selling bulletproof.